Oscar nominations before turning 25, a legendary screen icon. Right before the world watched her vanish into a pitch black ocean at 43. Envision the luxury yacht Splendour, a floating playground for Hollywood's elite club that transformed into a dark, claustrophobic prison on the night of November 28, 1981. Consider her paralyzing, lifelong phobia of dark water, a terror so deep she would not even step into a swimming pool. Yet her lifeless body was pulled from the freezing Pacific Ocean wearing nothing but a flannel nightgown and a down jacket. The industry that spent decades on her glamour left her to float like a discarded debris. This is the blueprint for how the ultimate elite can turn a desperate scream for help into a lifetime of enforced silence. My people, look at the official logs. For 30 years, the state of California forced the public to swallow a verdict of accidental drowning. They fed us a story about a clumsy slip on a wet dock, but look at the forensic data. When the case was officially reopened, the corporate cover up cracked wide open. The coroner aggressively amended her death certificate to drowning and other undetermined factors in her autopsy revealed fresh brutal bruising on her arms, wrists, and throat, trauma that proved violence occurred before she ever hit the water. The moment the ship's captain broke his silence, the studio narrative shattered. He confessed under oath that Natalie's husband, Robert Wagner, flew into a toxic jealous rage, smashing a white bottle right in front of her co-star Christopher Walken just minutes before she vanished. And today, the timeline itself is a crime scene. Nearby witness heard a woman crying out into the dark for over 15 minutes. Yet her husband waited 4 critical hours before even alerting the coast guards. In the Legend of Hollywood part, protecting the reputation of the leading man was worth more than the life of the leading lady. Imagine freezing to death in the open sea, watching the lights of your own boat fade while the people who swore to protect you turns up the music drown out your screams. 1 hour you are a global superstar, the next a liability to be managed. Today we are exposing how power, fame, and wealth can rewrite a horrific death into a minor mishap. 30 years later, the world is still asking the exact same mechanical question. Did she fall? Did she jump? Or she was punished? Were the witnesses simply wrong? But asking these questions is exactly what the system wants you to do, because as long as you are debating how she entered the water, you are not looking at the hands that held the leverage on that deck. That's why Natalie Wood's death remains one of the Hollywood biggest mysteries. But today we are not here to guess anything. We are here to audit the silence. Stay with me because the tide is turning and the water is finally giving up its secrets to us. Picture the sheer absurdity of the official explanation. We are told to believe that a glamorous world famous actress, terrified of the sea, decided to slip away in the middle of a freezing night, entirely alone, just to unite a rubber dignity that was banging against the hull. Envision her standing on that wet pitching deck at midnight, wearing a slippery satin nightgown and a heavy down jacket that would weigh 50 pounds the moment she hit the water. Consider the sheer psychological wall she would have to cross. This was not a casual swimmer. This was a woman whose fear of dark water was so pathological that she could not even stand the sound of waves crashing from a safe distance. Yet, the official narrative asks us to accept that she willingly put herself inches away from her greatest nightmare, completely unassisted, all alone. The industry painted a picture of a clumsy, reckless woman who brought on her own tragic fate. But the moment you look closer, at that deck, the accident story feels less like a tragedy and more like a carefully manufactured myth. My people, look at the physical geometry of the yacht Splendour. If Natalie simply slipped and fell while adjusting the lines, logic dictates the dingy would still be tied to the boat or drifting nearby. Instead, look at the recovery data. When the Coast Guard found her body at 7:44 a.m., the Dingy was drifting over a mile away with its ignition key turned the off position and the oars tightly lashed inside. If she fell while trying to board it, why wasn't the engine running? If she fell while trying to tie it up, why was the knot completely undone? Now, cross reference this with the Forzonic timestamps. Investigators found scraping marks along the rubber side of the boat, marks that perfectly matched the fingernails, damage on Natalie's hands. But here is the detail the studio tried to bury. The coroner's report explicitly stated that her heavy down jacket had become completely waterlogged, acting like a physical anchor, pulling her down. Forensic experts proved she survived in that freezing water for at least 30 minutes, clawing at the slicky rubber walls of the dingy, unable to climb inside. While she was fighting for air in the pitch black waves, the people inside the yacht's cabin were documented as having plenty of alcohol in their systems already. And the music was playing loud enough to drown out the ocean's sound. Imagine the absolute horror of that half an hour. You are slipping under the black waves, your fingers scraping uselessly against the rubber, screaming until your throat is raw, while the lights of your own floating sanctuary remain completely blind to you. 1 hour you are Hollywood royalty, the next a target systemic abandonment. Today, the defenders of the elites want you to focus purely on the physics of a slip. They want you to debate the traction of her shoes or the wetness of the deck. But the focusing on the fall is the ultimate misdirection because it completely ignores the dark, toxic atmosphere that drew a terrified woman out onto the isolated deck in the first place. The people, did she really just lose her fleeing, or was she fleeing from something far away, dangerous, inside that cabin? Stay with me because when we look at the timeline close enough of the flight that preceded the splash, the accident theory completely evaporates. Picture the desperation required to make a terrified woman leap blindly in her ultimate nightmare. The narrative shifts, asking us to believe that this was not a clumsy accident, but a deliberate act of escape. Envision the sheer emotional exhaustion of that night. Hours of toxic screaming, matches shattering glass, and alcohol fueled jealousy pushed a fragile soul to the absolute brink. Consider the psychological breaking point for a woman who spent 43 years paralyzed by the mere thought of open water. Jumping off the deck was not a casual choice. It was an act of raw, unfiltered panic. If she did jump, she did not do it to end her life. She did it because whatever was happening inside that luxury cabin felt infinitely more dangerous than freezing in that Pacific Ocean of her own fear. The industry tried to frame her as an emotionally unstable diva who simply snapped under the influence of alcohol. But when you look at the human wreckage inside that boat, her leap looks less like a breakdown and more like a desperate run for survival. My people look at the police statements. If Natalie willingly jumped to escape, she needed a destination. The theory suggests that she was trying to board the rubber dingy to flee to the shore of Catalina Island, just a few hundred yards away. But look at the Fosonic timeline. The boat's captain, Dennis Davern, testified that the explosive argument between Natalie's husband and Robert Wagner, her co-star Christopher Walken, reached a fever pitch just before the midnight. Wagner smashed a wine bottle on the table, screaming at Walken, "What are you trying to do? Sleep with my wife?" Now look at the physical evidence left on the board. Investigators found the stateroom door damaged, suggesting that someone was forcibly kept inside or locked out. But here is the detail the studio executives desperately tried to scrub from the press. When Natalie's body was recovered, the coroner noted that the fresh bruising on her wrists and arms perfectly matched the pattern of someone being forcibly grabbed and held against her will. If she jumped to get away, it was not just for a peaceful exit, it was a chaotic scramble to break free from the physical restraint. While she was leaping into the dark waves, the log shows that her husband did not immediately launch a search. Instead, he sat in the cabin, another drink, and argued with the captain about keeping the incident quiet. Imagine the absolute terror of that particular choice. Behind you, a man engulfed in a toxic, violent rage. In front of you, a pitch black abyss of freezing water that you have feared since your childhood. You choose the ocean instead. 1 hour you are an Hollywood icon, the next a target of domestic containment. Today, the defenders of the elites want you to believe that she was just an erratic, dramatic actress who made a reckless jump. They want you to blame her mental state and her blood alcohol level. But focusing on the jump is the ultimate gaslighting because it shifts the guilt from the creator who created the terror to the victim who tried to escape it. My people, did she really just jump off her own free will, or was she pushed to the edge by the system that knew its leading men would never face accountability? Stay with me because when we look at the third and most terrifying question, was she pushed? The final piece of this Hollywood horror story lock into its own place. Picture the final, most terrifying threshold of this mystery. We move past the theories of a clumsy slip or a panicked leap and look directly at the darkest possibility of that night, the reality of being cast aside by the hands you trusted. Envision the absolute vulnerability of Natalie Wood in those final moments. A petite 5 foot 3 women, exhausted from hours of terror, cornered on the slick deck in the dead of night, facing her husband, blinded by a toxic rage, alcohol fueled rage. Consider the sheer gravity of that betrayal. This was not a stranger attacking her in an alleyway, this was her partner. If she was pushed, her final conscious realization was not just that the cold shock of Pacific water hitting her skin, it was the sickening betrayal of looking up from the dark waves and seeing the face of a man who swore to love her, turning his back and walking away. The studio system spent decades painting this as an unpredictable cosmic accident. But the moment you look at the physical marks left on her body, the story shifts from the tragic mishap to the cold, calculated elimination. My people, look at the official case updates. In 2018, 37 years after that fateful night, the Los Angeles County Department officials changed Robert Wagner's status in the investigation. He was no longer just a grieving husband, he was formally named a person of interest in the death of Natalie Wood. Why did the law finally pivot? Because the forensic data could no longer be silenced. Look closely at the revised autopsy report. Investigator explicitly stated that the bruising on her body, the deep contusions on her arms, the abrasions on her face, and the specific trauma to her throat were entirely consistent with a physical assault before she went overboard. These were defensive wounds, the violent stamps of a struggle on the deck. Now look at the chilling eyewitnesses' testimony. That's the studio tried to suppress for decades. Marilyn Wayne, a witness on a neighboring yacht anchored just a few hundred yards away, went on the record stating she heard a woman desperately crying out, "Help me! Someone please help me! I'm drowning." Immediately after, Wayne heard a man's voice from the direction of the Splendour call back into the dark, cold, and mocking, "Hold on, we are coming to get you." But no one came. The logs prove that instead of launching the dingy of throwing a ring, the yacht remained stationary. The powerful industry elite let the ocean do the dirty work, ensuring that a pristine Hollywood script would not be ruined by a messy public divorce. Imagine the freezing cold slowly paralyzing your limbs, listening to the muffled sound of the music and the laughter coming from your own boat, realizing that the people on the board are actively waiting for you to drown. 1 hour, you are a silver screen goddess. The next hour, an inconvenient to be erased from the credits of their life. Today, the protectors of the Hollywood royalty want you to get lost in the endless debate of whether she fell, jumped, or she was pushed into. They want you arguing, go on, mechanical details, whatever, but debating the exact physics of her fall is the ultimate trap because it forces you to look at the water instead of looking at the corrupt system of power, wealth, and the studio immunity that kept those men safe on the deck for half a century. My people, did the ocean kill Natalie Wood? Or did the silence of Hollywood hold her head under the water forever? Stay with me because now that we have unmasked the horror on that disc, it's time to expose the final piece of the puzzle, the 4 hour blackout that sealed her fate. Picture the psychological warfare used to break the people who actually saw the truth, the eyewitness. The narrative shifts once again, asking us to believe that the only reason this case is still a mystery is because the ordinary people who heard her screams were simply confused or mistaken or outright just lying. Envision being an ordinary citizen trapped in a nightmare. You are resting on the quiet boat in the dead of night, only to be jolted, awakened by the haunting, desperate cries of a drowning woman cutting through the fog. Consider the sheer gaslighting that followed for decades. These witnesses were told by the high powered studio attorneys, corporate fixers, and the skeptical detectives that what they heard was just a hallucination or a couple of drunk vacationers having a loud party. The system forced them to doubt their own conscience, own senses, their own memories, and their own ears. The industry tried to frame the witnesses as unreliable, fame hungry, and bystanders who just misread the tragic night. But the moment you look at the consistency of what they reported, you realize the witness were not wrong. They were just, terrified of the missionary trying to silence them. The missionary, my people, look at the official transcripts. The defense relied entirely on the idea that the ocean might play tricks on people's ears. But look at the unaccessible, this is timeline logs. Marlene the stockbroker nearby on the yacht didn't just give a vague statement. Decades later, she did a formal report detailing that at exactly 11:30 p.m. she heard a woman crying for help over and over again with shouting, "Help me, someone, please help me, I am drowning." Now, cross reference her statement with the log of second completely independent witness, a man on a nearby fishing boat who reportedly hearing the exact same thing, same voice, screaming for her life at same time. Two completely unrelated people, separated by the open water, documented the identical chilling phrase by one single woman's voice. But look at how the studio apparatus aggressively weaponized its leverage to suppress this data. When Wayne tried to take her detailed timeline to the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department in 1981, her statement was strangely brushed aside, and she was never formally interviewed for the initial investigation. Worse, look at the intimidation tactics uncovered when the case reopened. Wayne went on the record and revealing that immediately after Natalie's death, she received a typed, unsigned note slipped under her door that actually read as, "If you value your life, stay quiet about what you heard that night." The system did not ignore the witnesses because they were wrong. The system intentionally buried them because they were indisputably right. Imagine holding the missing pieces to a historic injustice only to watch a multi-billion-dollar industry threaten your life and call you a liar until you finally lock your mouth out. 1 hour you are a citizen doing the right thing, and the next loose end to be snipped from a script completely. Today, the defenders of the elite want you to pick apart the witnesses. They want you to debate whether the fog muffled the sound or if the wind was blowing the wrong way. But attacking the witnesses is the ultimate corporate playbook because as long as you are questioning the people who heard the crime, you are looking away from the predators completely who committed it in the first place. My people, did the witness really make a mistake, or was their only mistake believing that the truth could survive against the Hollywood royalty? Stay with me because now that we have audited the silenced witnesses, we are ready to expose the final terrifying conclusion to the systematic cover up. We can skeptically state few which has still not been proven openly. There might be a jealousy angle. The fact that Wagner smashed a wine bottle while screaming at Walken shows that he was in the blind rage right before Natalie vanished. If he was that angry about her career or her closeness with her co-star Walken, it's a short jump to physical confrontation on that deck. Second angle is the delay in calling for help. This is the hardest part to explain away. Because if your wife, who is terrified of water, What you do is missing from a boat in the middle of the night out of nowhere. You call the Coast Guard immediately as a loving husband. Wagner waited several hours before making the call. Critics argue that he used that time to sober up and get the story made straight with the captain. So no one tells otherwise. Third is the captain's U-turn. If you see this case, for 30 years, Captain Dennis Devon backed Wagner's story. But when he finally broke his silence, he said that Wagner was responsible for her death. Also, he said that Wagner held his hostage in the days after, making sure they told the same story. He heard Wagner and Natalie having a terrible fight on the deck right before it went complete dead silence. The other side is, if you see why no charges has been applied till now, even though the police named Wagner a person of interest in 2018, they have not charged him because no direct eyewitnesses, no one actually saw a push, right? The alcohol, everyone was so drunk that the reasonable doubt still stayed. It's easy to argue in the court likewise contamination, because the initial 1981 investigation was so poorly done handled, much of physical evidence is fully gone. In his own book, Wagner admitted that they argued that night, but he maintained she went to her room and he has no idea how she ended up in the water. What do you think, people, about this case? Leave your comments for us to discuss about this and find out the truth.